Choosing the right access integrations isn't just a tech decision, it's also a business decision. It's about enabling security, scalability, and performance while aligning technology with your strategy. Welcome to this fifth episode of RealVNC's Remote Access Redefined podcast series. And in today's episode, we're going to give you the tools to do just that as we explore everything from key evaluation criteria to real-world success stories, vendor partnerships, and the things to avoid. I'm your host, Nick Cavalancia from Conversational Geek, and joining me today is Dom Parks, RealVNC's head developer for OEM. Dom, as always, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
Glad you're here. I'm also joined by Gee Lamba. He's RealVNC's head of strategic alliances and partnerships. Gee, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Nick. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Glad you're both here. I'm going to actually start with both of you, Dom and G. If you both could maybe take 30 seconds and introduce yourselves, tell the audience a little bit about the work that you do at RealVNC. Dom, could I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So, I'm Dominic. I've been at RealVNC since the early days of it being an incorporated business, and I look after the technical side of what we call OEM. And I've always been doing that, and that's basically getting SDKs or VNC technology into our customers' projects, into our customers' devices and solutions. So, yeah, my job's really varied, and it's something that keeps me sane, keeps me happy.
Wonderful. G.
Yeah, so Nick, I head up the strategic alliances and OEM partnerships at RealVNC. I get to wake up every day and work with a diverse range of companies, from aerospace and maritime to medical device manufacturers who are building life-saving machines, and also other SaaS companies looking to extend their own capabilities. And what kind of ties them all together is a need for a secure, scalable remote access solution. And that's where we come in. So, my focus really is on helping these partners integrate our tech into their hardware or software solutions, um, making sure that there is, a good product fit and alignment, supporting them throughout that integration process, and also jointly building go-to-market strategies, leveraging our OEM and SDK models, which we'll be talking about a lot in this podcast series.
Wonderful. Glad to have you both. Dom, I'm going to start with you. We've done 4 of these podcasts before this one. And in every single one, we talk a little bit about OEM and SDK integrations at RealVNC. But I think just in case there's somebody who's joining us for the first time with this one, can maybe you quickly break down what each of those options are, what they bring to the table, the business scenarios, just something sort of succinct that defines OEM and SDK integrations when it comes to remote access.
Yeah, sure, Nick. So one of my colleagues came up with the idea of, or the analogy of a cake. And OEM Connect is the off-the-shelf product. It's ready there. You can just drop it into your party that you're organizing. You don't get a great deal of choice about what it looks like or how it's decorated or what it's made of, but you can pick from the shelves and just take that. And it will suit most parties. You'll find something that suits most parties. So the SDK is kind of it's a toolkit, but in cake terms, it's the stuff that you get from the shelves that makes up a cake. It's the ingredients. Maybe it's the same ingredients, but it's ready to be baked in whatever way you need. Much more open-ended. You can change the icing to suit your specific event. And yeah, in real terms, it's really about Connect is the off-the-shelf product, so it's what you can use. Probably a lot of people are already using that when they think about an integration. So people are aware of the user model and the subscription that works under, and how Teams and device management works there. And it's not got any scope for rebranding, but it's got a very obvious, tangible solution just right there. Whereas the SDK is much more like, actually, we need a seamless integration. We need something that can be rebranded. We need something that we've got a particular development idea that we want to bring to our remote access feature that we're adding, or maybe we've got a particular product that needs something that just isn't going to be supported by Connect, by the pre-baked cake.
And Gee, you're sort of the cake coordinator, I guess. I don't know what the analogy is going to work here, but I'm going to go with that. And you've got more of a strategic view of things with customers. How do you think businesses should decide between the two options in a way that aligns with the customer's goals themselves?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think time to market is a really important factor here. Because oftentimes, when I speak with engineering teams, um, they've been tasked to go out into the market to find a solution. Um, it's not necessarily like they have an abundance of time and they are looking to innovate and looking at new options. They tend to be juggling multiple priorities. So this has kind of been mandated to them. And they have to be very strategic about how they invest their time and um, where they allocate their resources when they evaluate different software options. So in cases like that, my suggestion to them is to start with maybe our off-the-shelf solution, which is OEM Connect, because it's fully pre-configured. The integration process is very seamless, and it gets partners to market faster. Um, on the other hand, if a company has a very specific set of technical requirements, and they need to tightly embed remote access into a much broader solution, then oftentimes SDK, I would say, is the better choice. Um, it is fully customizable, but it does require additional development time and resources. So, you know, I've seen VR conferencing vendors, surgical system manufacturers, digital signage companies go down the route of SDK because it allows them to create more tailored, brand consistent user experiences. But I think ultimately it comes down to like your internal capabilities, your own go-to-market timeline, and what your customers expect, in terms of the overall product experience.
And Gee, I'm wondering, you talked about time to market as the very first thing you mentioned here, and as businesses are starting their integration process, is the first question they should be asking themselves, how fast do I want this to bring to market? Or is there some other initial question that they should be asking themselves when choosing to go down either of those paths?
Yeah, I think a really good first question to ask yourself is, what kind of deployment model makes the most sense for your product and your users? And that's something that we talk about very early on, with our partners. Um, whether they need a cloud-based solution that's quick and easy to deploy, easy to scale, or perhaps they need a more direct on-premise setup that gives them full control. Um, and the on-premise solution can even operate in an offline environment. So if you need something that's going into an air-gapped, highly secure environment, that's oftentimes a better choice. For instance, if you're let's say a medical device company and you're building something in a very classified environment, for you, on-premise might be non-negotiable. But if you're developing, let's say, like a field support tool that's used across multiple geolocations, cloud connectivity in that scenario can really speed things up for you. So I think before jumping into OEM and SDK or anything technical like that, it's really worth asking, where will our product live? Um, what level of control, security, and accessibility, do my customers expect? And then that kind of sets the stage for everything else.
Excellent. There's another aspect that we've talked about before in these podcasts. And Dom, I'm going to throw this to you. And that's the topic of scalability. It's obviously comes into play in these discussions. For those that are evaluating solutions, why is that a critical factor in your opinion? And then how should they evaluate a given solution's ability to scale with their own needs?
Yeah. There's a few aspects to scalability. So the obvious one is when you're thinking about a solution or a SaaS type solution in particular, you're thinking about, in our case, cloud connectivity. Does that scale? Is it going to scale for enough users and devices that we want to manage in our solution when we've integrated, VNC Connect into our solution? Is this going to scale? Is it going to be Is it going to have the right SLAs for us? Is it going to be supported, for the size of deployment we've got? Hopefully we can answer those questions for you when you talk to us. But I think in terms of integrations and in terms of particularly the SDK or SDK versus OEM Connect, there's scalability in terms of how you use the solution. If it's something that's off the shelf or doesn't quite fit with your use case, whoever's provided the solution, maybe it doesn't fit with the end user's kind of UX and how they actually do their day-to-day work. It's not streamlined. It's causing friction. That can become a problem. I think that's a scalability issue too, and I think we can probably help address that, or at least you can choose the right solution and the right approach to remote access to really streamline that, remove kind of pain points and points of friction that you're seeing. So yeah, it's two sides to it. There's a kind of user UX side of scalability, which is probably non-traditional version of it, but that's how I see it anyway.
And Gee, you mentioned earlier air-gapped, which got me thinking. And you've also talked about medical devices as one of the customer companies that you've worked with. And that gets me thinking about the idea of security within remote access. And so the question I'm wondering here is, what should organizations be looking for? What should they be demanding from remote access solutions? I mean, what is it really that they need to see in terms of security? And are there any, I'll call them red flags, like things that might be missing that they really should be seeing in solutions?
I think that's probably one of my favorite questions. And it's definitely something that I think shouldn't be rushed through, right? So in my experience, I think, companies should really demand that, any remote access solution that they're exploring, that it meets the highest security and compliance standards. And they should really be upfront about, verifying and validating that. So that includes things like, getting the certifications, ISO 27001, GDPR, HIPAA, and now NIS2 if you're in the European Union. So, you want to see like things like strong encryption, granular level access controls, audit trails, and regular product updates as like a standard, that the provider has. And I think another thing that sometimes gets overlooked is actual evidence of, regular testing or penetration testing, because that really shows that the company isn't just talking about security, but they're actively validating it, and there is some history for that. So I think as for red flags, if a vendor can't clearly articulate how they handle, things like privacy, encryption, etc., or they're vague about compliance in some way, that's a sign for you to kind of dig deeper. So transparency is really important in this case. We worked with a healthcare partner, and they have a remote diagnostics system which connects directly into MRI and X-ray machines, so really, high-end devices. So for them, it was about ensuring end-to-end security and compliance, and it wasn't just about ticking boxes. It was essential to protecting their patient data, and maintaining those, the uninterrupted operations. So, in the end, a secure remote access solution will safeguard your customers. It will protect your brand reputation, right? And your ability to stay compliant. So it's really worth expecting more than just the basics when it comes to security.
And Dom, there's another factor that comes into play. That's the idea of performance and compatibility. I'm thinking back to your cake analogy here. And in some ways, I was thinking of more of like in the supermarket going to the refrigerator and just grabbing a cake that's there. And that's sort of like just the OEM versus the SDK. Well, I realize this analogy is going to break a bit, but that's like going to the bakery in the supermarket saying, can you make me this and this? And I have very specific requirements, although the analogy doesn't entirely work because SDK means the client themselves is doing it. However, there's still this issue of performance, compatibility, that organizations want to ensure that the solutions that they choose work seamlessly within their environment. And so how can they, when they're looking at solutions, how can they ensure that and deliver, you talked about yourself, the user experience that they might want to have. And that's why they would use, let's say the SDK creates a better user experience for their customers. It's branded and so on. How can they ensure that the solution is going to deliver that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, I think the obvious answer, the immediate answer is you should be able to take a trial of whatever solution you're looking at. You should be able to really get involved with using it for an extended period of time, probably with the help of technical people on the solution side. So with our help in this case, and really dig into what you're trying to achieve, what your in the case of performance, what your network environment is like, what your requirements are for things like, maybe you've got a real specific need for, and this kind of goes back to the questions you need to ask yourself early on. What are the parameters of what you're trying to achieve here? What are the metrics? Maybe you need something that works really well over high latency links. Maybe you need something that, and that's something that the legacy VNC solutions are going to really struggle with because they're TCP based. Their round trip time is a real failing point there. So high latency links. Maybe you're looking for that. Maybe you're looking for, like we've had customers who've said they need a solution that's just got that feeling like you're actually at the desktop, which is it's an obvious one. It's a desktop remote access solution, but actually with the SDK, a lot of the times it's not a desktop that you're remoting. But we can provide the highest quality level and acuity, and also more importantly, probably is the kind of perceived latency when you're moving the mouse around, it feeling like you're actually controlling the desktop from that point. So that might be your requirement there, or you might want to actually stream some video, and then you need to evaluate your solution in situ for an extended period of time. And I think for performance, at least with the SDK versus Connect, it's quite easy because if you've used Connect, you can see the performance of that connection, of that stuff. So if you use that first, maybe if you start with Connect first, you can see this performance is adequate, this does what we need, or it's better than we need, or it's worse than we need, whatever. The SDK will be the same because it's the same code base and the same connectivity methods. So that's a neat one there. But I think, all of those things are worth taking into account when you're kind of assessing. And it's the first point. You need to have a list of things that you want out of the solution, and performance is probably one of the bigger topics. Compatibility could be a few things. So I think you hinted at things like, is it compatible with our use case? Is it something that's going to mesh easily with, I don't know, we've got a, let's say a C#.NET solution. Is there a way we can integrate easily with our developers all know C#? Is it something that we can integrate with easily? And that's going to be fairly easy to tell quite quickly. This solution has an API in C#.NET. This solution doesn't. This is all a Golang solution or whatever. I don't believe there's actually a Golang equivalent of us, but there are better and worse APIs out there for this sort of thing. So that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it, compatibility. When I think about that, I think about, do we support your devices? And that's not just OSs, but it could well be. I think you want to see that the solution has a fairly wide support for a lot of devices, in particular the ones that you want, but also maybe the ones you want in the future. So you may not think we don't need iOS at the moment, but down the line maybe you will. So I think you want to see that wide support, but I think you also want to see ongoing testing, ongoing early support for new versions of OSs, and ongoing support for new devices that come out, new OSs that come out that are not necessarily, something you would expect. I think one of the areas that we see a lot with the SDK in particular is that there are devices out there, they have a desktop, but it's not necessarily what you would treat as a desktop in a normal world, something like a HMI or a phone or whatever. It's something somewhat different. And in that case, you want a piece of software that runs maybe with a low power device, a low power CPU, a custom way of capturing the desktop. Those sorts of things kind of really widen out the compatibility that you can you almost take for granted with some solutions, and you just won't get with others.
Excellent. I think that I would like to kind of elevate the conversation for a second here. We've been talking a little bit in depth about what to look for in solutions, very specific aspects of the solutions and so on. But I want to talk more about maybe the vendor, the partnership aspect, what customer organizations need from a vendor and so on. And Gee, I want to start with you. I think that the idea of it's great that we can have this really good technical solution that meets the customer needs, ticks off all the technical boxes, meets the language requirements like Dom just talked about, et cetera, et cetera. But the vendor themselves, the partnership, the relationship could probably make or break an integration because they may not be able to get the support they need, or they may not be able to get the resources they need, and so on. What should businesses who are looking for a solution, what should they expect from the vendor themselves to ensure that there's a smooth implementation, that there's ongoing success, et cetera?
Yeah, I think for me personally, coming from an alliance and partnership background for, I guess, the majority of my career, I think, I would place the emphasis on developing a really strong partnership because that can really make all the difference. It's not just about handing over product documentation and software trials and then wishing you good luck. It's about making sure that you're there with, the partner every stage of their journey. So at RealVNC, for example, we have a dedicated customer success manager and an account manager. So there's always a direct line of support. Um, and we, want to stay involved, not just during the setup process, but all the way through launch and then beyond as well. As we've mentioned, we've worked with many industries within medical devices, defenses, semiconductors. In these types of industries, precision and reliability are very essential. Um, you know, the rollouts require very tight coordination. So we treat every integration like a shared project. Um, and Dom knows this because he's been at RealVNC longer than me, but many of our customers have been with us for a very long time, 10 years or more. And that's not just because, our solution works, but it's because it becomes, critical. It becomes a critical part of their product. And once we're integrated, we become then, a long-term partner, not just a one-time vendor, right? So yeah, I feel very strongly about that. That the vendor should really feel like an extension of your own team, someone who understands your goals and objectives, and sticks with you when things get complex.
And Dom, I'm still thinking about that technical side of it, the support that's necessary throughout that journey that G is talking about here. What kind of resources should businesses be thinking about being in place with their vendor to ensure that their team can maximize the potential from the solution they pick?
Yeah, I think G covered most of it really. Although you want to make sure the basics are in place, the documentation, the APIs, the samples. But I think it's really making sure you're going to have someone that you can talk to about these things, because an API may not be completely obvious from the first steps. You may need some advice on how you design or architect a solution. You may not have team members on your side who are used to how we figure out how the connectivity is going to work, how we figure out how all these things are going to fit together, and what the limitations are, where the edges of what's possible are. So I think you need that sort of advice, that sort of expertise on hand. And it's got to really take you through from getting the SDK, looking at the docs, all the way through to the end of a proof of concept, I guess, if that's the approach you're taking as a as an evaluation. And yeah, I mean, actually, I would almost turn it around. Some of the times, as a company who's coming to us, I think you need to think about what resources do I need on my side to do this. Are we happy with the off-the-shelf cake, just to bring it to the party and drop it there, cut it up? Then we don't need a huge amount. But if we are going to really integrate it, if we're going to bake it, then we need some people with the right expertise there. And obviously we can help at RealVNC, make it clear what is needed there. And hopefully the APIs and the samples really get people going pretty quickly. But But that sort of thing, those are the sorts of resources you're going to need to think about. It's not just what you're going to get from us or from the solution provider, but what you need to put in place yourself and the time that you might want to dedicate to it if you want to go down the SDK route.
Well, let's do this. I want to kind of put the cake to the test, as it were. Maybe you could give us a couple stories where someone baked one themselves and someone just bought one from the store, as it were.
Yep.
Stick with the analogy. You've obviously worked on many integrations, maybe all of them. I don't know. You've been there forever, so that's quite possible. Can you maybe start with an example of where a business effectively went with the OEM approach, which they got a really fast, impactful outcome, and they were up and running very quickly? What did that look like?
Yeah, so G mentioned a medical one before, and I've got there's a pretty similar one that's actually a pretty old one, where a large manufacturer of medical equipment just needed a really quick to market solution. They already knew of RealVNC. They had already used VNC, in the 90s when it was just a new thing, and they knew of RealVNC. They had a subscription to our product at the time. So they needed something really quick that they could just offer to their customers to kind of support their customers' devices that they'd bought, but also to allow anybody basically in that environment to connect into these large-scale machines. I think it's MRI scanners mainly. Connect into those and support them, diagnose problems with them, and potentially also offer kind of route to remote diagnosis of the medical kind as well. So that was really fast, impactful, very low effort in terms of integrating it, because they were aware of what Connect was and its predecessors. So it was mainly a case of how do we configure this, how do we get it installed, and just a conversation with us. So that's a very light one. To go a bit more into a Connect, but somewhat more integrated approach, we've seen some manufacturers. It seems to be a repeated use case, actually, manufacturers of simulators, and in this case it was a flight simulator manufacturer, and they wanted a way not so much to provide the simulation itself via Connect or via an off-the-shelf solution. They wanted to actually monitor it, so they have people outside the simulation, people inside the simulation actually doing the whatever the training was, but they wanted a way to monitor that from outside. And in this case, they started with Connect, had a solution that was integrated to connect to the right endpoints, do the right things, get the right performance out of that. And that was mainly a case of going through what are the right settings you need for this. How do I lock it down to do just what we need? What settings can I configure to, make sure that the right users are connecting to the right things and we're not leaking anything out to anybody else? So it's a case of just, I guess it's a true integration challenge. It's not so much of a development challenge or a solution. It's actually just how do we get this bit of software just off the shelf to just fit into this environment in a safe, secure, and kind of performant way. And that worked well. And I think in that particular case, I don't think they've moved to SDK yet, but it's a sort of environment where that may well make sense in the future, and it's a really good way to go. I think, as G said, you could start with the Connect for the kind of quick, simple integration, and then move on to SDK if you need to.
I have an example that I wanted to add as well to Dom's use case, and it comes from the maritime space because it always fascinates me. And it's a company that used our SDK to basically build a remote access solution directly into a submarine's navigation system. And what they wanted was the ability to kind of have real-time control and visibility into the navigation without having to send crew members on the main deck. And as you can imagine, in kind of high risk or environments or for safety reasons, they may wish to do so. So it really gave them much more flexibility in terms of how they operated within those hard to reach environments. So I think it's again a really good example of how a tailored integration can make a huge difference, not just in terms of efficiency, but in terms of how the product gets used on a day-to-day basis.
And G, I'm also wondering from maybe a partnership perspective, You could give some example of how a strong vendor relationship sets the business up for the success that we're trying to talk about in these examples. Is there something you could give me an example of where the partnership itself actually added value or strengthened or something along those lines? And so this wasn't just an exercise in, oh, they took really good advantage of, RealVNC's solution, but, something where they saw greater success because of the partnership itself.
Yeah, I think a good example would be a company called Biotronic. They're a leading medical device company. And what they did was they embedded our remote access solution directly into their medical programming device. It's called Renamic Neo Programmer. And what that does is it lets clinicians securely access and adjust implantable cardiac devices during patient follow-ups. So it isn't just efficient, it actually helps patient safety as well. But I guess in that relationship, what made it work wasn't just the tech, it was about the trust and the close collaboration that we had. We were aligned from day one, and we stayed with them throughout the rollout process and beyond, and we still support them today. And it's the same story for many other industries where, let's say, digital signage, emergency call systems, or maritime navigation, as the example earlier. Those types of use cases, having a partner that shows up when things get complex can make a huge difference. That kind of consistency, it becomes mission critical, really fast.
Excellent. I want to kind of shift to our final sort of chapter of today's podcast, which is about sort of some advice moving forward. And I want to ask each of you this question. And Dom, I'm going to start with you, and Gee, I would like you to also answer. But it's just sort of, what's the most common mistake, wall, pitfall, something that you see that a business comes to when it comes to remote access integration, and how can they avoid it? And Dom, could I start with you?
Yeah, sure. So technically, I don't think it's one of the things that keeps me on my toes, I suppose, and keeps me in this job. Is I don't think there is a common hurdle technically. I think we see a lot of different hurdles that different organizations meet and hopefully overcome. In each thing that we've done, really. I think some of the stuff that does turn up more often than other things are things like businesses who won't make use of cloud connectivity, and that can be a hurdle because the reason we've built our cloud connectivity is to make it easier to connect to endpoints over the internet, and people come to us and say, we want to build a solution with your SDK, but we want to keep complete control over that. And that's a challenge, because then they need to build a lot more. They need to understand how connectivity works. They need to get into that kind of whole mess of how you make solutions that work through NAT and firewalls and things like that. Now, I think that's something we're going to address in the future. Make it easier for people to deploy things like that we've provided, so they don't have to get into that kind of complex world so much. But that's probably purely technically, that's probably one of the more common things I've seen. And then I think it's stuff that we've hinted at before. It's like the regulatory, it's not quite technical, but maybe more on the side of people have heard of VNC. They've maybe used VNC in the past. They know it's insecure. They're certain of that, and they've got an IT policy that says that, and that can be a bit of a hurdle to kind of educate, overcome that. And it's usually not the people who come to us that have that issue. It's the people that they're going to, either their stakeholders, or it's people that they're going to sell their solution to. And it's kind of overcoming that. It's an education task, and it's explaining, we're not insecure any longer. We're not LAN only any longer. We're not slow any longer. So it's all these kind of stereotypes that apply, and that does feed into the regulatory stuff, because clearly the old open source VNC is not going to meet any of those standards that Gee mentioned earlier.
What you're saying is you have improved the product in 20 years.
We have, yeah. Hopefully it's obvious as soon as you try it. I mean, actually, being serious, if you look at our latest protocol and the way our endpoints connect to each other via our cloud services or not, and that's entirely up to you, whichever product you're using. If you look at that, it's actually, if you were technically trying to evaluate what is this network data, what is this data that's traveling over my network, it would be almost impossible for you to associate that with the LVNC in any way. It's running over a different transport. It's entirely encrypted. It doesn't use the same ports necessarily. It's completely a new thing. So yeah, it's an education task there. And back to the other question about resources, I think that's another hurdle that we see. Technically, sometimes people have struggled to figure out exactly how much time and resources they need to implement some of these solutions, which is why it can be a great approach to start simple. Either start with Connect or start with the SDK, but simple. Do the minimum that you need to get this going, and then get the right stakeholders involved early on. And again, I'm veering massively off technical here, but measure the right metrics really about what you're trying to achieve, because that's not always the case. We do see people who are building a remote access solution and they're looking at the cost of that, and they're not looking at what it might save in terms of truck rolls or other metrics that actually make sense to compare it to. So those are hurdles that we see.
And Gee, anything to add? What hurdles you've seen?
Yeah, I think it's, just building to Dom's points that he's mentioned. The two most common things that I see is, they tend to overcomplicate things way too early, going out to try and build a fully customized solution, which is complex, before they really understand what their core needs are. And also, underestimating the ongoing effort that is required to maintain that solution. And it can put a drain on your internal resources and slow progress. And it's not what we want, right? So my advice is always to start by building a minimum viable product, something simple that works, and it helps you validate your use case quickly. So once you've kind of, learned from that and what really matters and how it meets your needs, then you can gradually add more complexity and customization to it. And then that way, it keeps your project manageable. You avoid common pitfalls, and you set yourself up for success as you scale. And I think the other thing is that you can also communicate the output of your MVP to other additional stakeholders within the business a lot quicker for better decision making.
Awesome. Other question I have, Dom, I'm wondering, just for companies that maybe feel stuck, maybe they've already chosen a solution, maybe they're still trying to pick a solution, I'm not sure which, but they just feel stuck. Are there any quick wins or approaches that you'd recommend just to help them move forward?
Some of it's the same thing that Gee and I have said, which is the start simple thing, and really take a step back and see what is it, what can we do at a minimum level that would actually be beneficial, and what metric do we want to measure that by. I think that's the fundamental one. But also, if they're using our solution, or even if they're not, talk to us, and talk to us about what you need to be happy in terms of using it as a remote access solution. Is it an education thing? Do we need to provide you with some guidance or even like collateral that will say, this is what this solution is now? If it's Connect, say, here's how you sell this to your IT teams. Or is it something like the regulatory approval? Is that something that we can help you with as well? Is it something we can provide you, again, collateral for or certification for? It might be something really low level, like you need a software bill of materials or something like that, or just guidance, whatever. But yeah, I think if people are stuck, it's probably because there's something in the solution that they've got that isn't quite meeting what they need, which is probably just stating the obvious. So for us, at least, I think the best bet really is that talk to us, because it's quite easy for our SDK to add new features, whether that's us guiding you through adding something that you need to do, or to improve things, because it's quite a customizable API. It allows you to add your own messages from endpoint to endpoint. It allows you to do quite a lot, just with the basics. So that might be something that we can work with you to provide a kind of solution to whatever the problem might be. But equally, we can add new features to the SDK and expose new bits of functionality in the SDK, particularly if it's something in Connect that you need and it's not there in the SDK, just talk to us and we can get that to you quite quickly, I think.
And it sounds like there's probably another angle here as well, Gee, on your perspective. You hear Dom talking about, just talk to us. You have some expectations, you have a need. What's your advice on building a lasting and productive partnership for customers with a remote access provider?
Yeah, I think we touched on some of this already. But I think for any productive partnership, it really comes down to having good transparency and alignment. I think those things are very important. Um, and I also think, it goes both ways. So your remote access provider should also deeply understand your own objectives, your own product roadmap, and how you support your customers, and what they expect from the overall experience. Because in that way, you can treat the integration like a full product, not just a simple feature that you just plug in to your own. And I think when you go in with that kind of mindset, you shift from being seen as just a vendor to being seen as a true innovation partner that helps you grow over time.
Awesome. That really does help, I think. That's some good perspective there. And before we wrap up, maybe one key takeaway from each of you want our listeners to remember about navigating OEM and SDK integrations. Gee, could I just start with you?
Yeah, I think if there's one key takeaway from this, I would say, don't just chase what's possible, but focus on what's going to last. So whether you're building medical devices, managing fleet operations, or supporting industrial systems, the right remote access approach should do more than just work. It should fit into your strategy, should grow with your product, simplify your operations, and most importantly, it should enhance the overall experience for your customers.
And Dom?
Yeah, definitely. It goes back to the kind of work with us, work with our roadmap. Tell us what you need for the future, and we can provide those things. Hopefully, I think I'm going to sound like a kind of stuck record or something, but I think the big takeaway for me is talk to us. Tell us what your use case is, what the environment is, what resources you need, or we'll tell you what resources you need, and we'll try and figure out with you what the best approach would be. And that might not be using our stuff. It might be that it's not the right solution for you. But I think that first conversation is really important, and the ongoing conversations are really important. And yeah, take a look at the ebooks that we publish and the stuff that gives you an overview of the process, how you get going with the Connect versus the SDK, and security white papers as well. I think they'll probably be really helpful for some of these use cases. Really take a look at what you're getting into.
Wonderful, guys. I appreciate your input. That's all the time that we do have today. So thank you both. We've been talking with Dom Parks, lead developer for OEM at RealVNC, and Gee Lamba, head of strategic alliances and partnerships at RealVNC. If you'd like more information on RealVNC and their OEM program, you can visit realvnc.com/OEM. And remember, this is the 5th episode in a 6-part series, so be on the lookout for all the podcast episodes in this series on your choice of podcast platform. Thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you all in the next one.